Well, here I am again with another main mission and thus another nearly hour-long video. This is starting to become a pattern and I'm not sure I like it. But this map is actually far more tactically interesting than Chapter 3's main mission was, so let's get into the preparations. The first thing that I do is, as I promised in the last video, trade over the axes I bought from Axel to Dean, who is going to be actually deployed in this map, unlike Axel. Then we advance the chapter to Chapter 4. Damn, I'm like a fifth of the way through the game already. First thing that happens is prisoner exchange, which gives me a bit more money. And in addition to that, we have another letter from Lynette, and that's going to give me a large chunk of money. So I think my money issues are pretty much over at this point. Next up, we're going to go and pick up our civilian requests. The thing about the civilian requests for this chapter is that they're starting to get really difficult. And because of that, this is the first map in the game with civilian requests that I'm not going to aim to complete. And I'll explain why a bit later on. Next up, we hire the usual crowd of mercenaries who need levels or kills. There are several new mercenaries I can hire, and a lot of them have happiness requirements for permanent recruitment. But for now, I'm only going to be hiring the ones I really need for this map, because next I am headed to the Kingfisher Pavilion. And because of the way the game generates who's in the pavilion, we want to have as few units as possible in our active group at this point. Now, Kramer picks up the Adept skill from the food that he picks up, and Faye and Ruby both get Beef Bourguignon, which gives them automatic healing at the start of each turn, in addition to a big boost to their HP. So that's going to be really helpful for their durability for this entire chapter. Sylvis also gets fed with a dish that she likes, which gives her a little bit of extra hit and crit. And then the last thing we're going to do in preps is reactivate Zine. She has the search skill, like Axel, and she has certain properties that make her a better deploy on this particular map than Axel is. Alright, let's move on to talking about my deployment. Obviously, I'm going to be bringing most of the usual suspects, Leon for his extreme combat, all of my units with experience or combat requirements, and of course we're also going to be bringing Zine for the search skill, but the unexpected one possibly is Izerna, who I am once again bringing to a main mission. Because these maps are so long, her low movement isn't too much of an issue here, so she's going to be getting a fair bit of healing done during the course of this map. The overall goal of this map is based heavily around the green units who are currently on the map. There are a total of 12 of these, some of whom will be appearing on future turns as reinforcements, and in order to complete the map, all we have to do is make sure that at least 7 of these guys escape, and then escape ourselves. But for full recruitment, we need to make sure that they all escape, because the unit who just joined us as a guest, Dode, will not join us permanently unless this happens. Getting all of these units to escape does take a fair amount of turns because many of them are crippled. However, there is another recruitable unit on this map who appears on the map very late, and so we're going to have plenty of time to get them all off before she shows up. So, the way I'm splitting my units up is all of the cavalry are headed north along the road, along with Zine, who needs to head for her search point. Meanwhile, my infantry units, who all need training, are heading due west, to an area where there will be a large number of reinforcements spawning over the course of the map. And the reason I do this is that much of the map is taken up by a terrain called wilds. This dramatically restricts my cavalry units' movement, so it's best for all of them to stay on the road as much as possible. However, all of my training project units are light infantry, which takes no movement penalty over wild terrain at all. So they are free to head west and run interference on the reinforcements that would otherwise be harrying the green units as they make their way to one of the two escape units. You will also notice that Zeem's thief type movement also suffers no penalty from the wild terrain, and this is why I chose to bring her rather than Axel, who does take a movement penalty. Dode, the new unit I mentioned, starts using Battle Cry at this point, and it's nice to finally get that on our side. Obviously it's significantly less useful for us than it was for all the enemy bosses, who had lots of turns to just sit there and spam it while we approached them. So it's not going to be super useful overall, however it does have some utility on this map, due to Dode not really needing to be anywhere in a hurry at the moment. Of the green units, the vast majority are sensible and take the eastern road down away from the enemy as much as possible. However, there is one green cavalry unit who is determined to take the western road instead, and that's really irritating because if we don't block the enemy off, he puts himself in range of several archers, so we have to go to pretty great lengths to deal with that. Ruby has dismounted in order to move into the wild terrain. This area is largely blocked off by some terrain features, so we only have to hold a few choke points, and Ruby's mobility isn't going to be all that useful, so she dismounts in order to protect her horse from damage as much as possible. Leon is going to be equipping his harpoon on this turn, and the reason for that is that the harpoon has an increased injury rate. This is in service of one of the civilian requests. I did try my best to complete all of them, even though I didn't actually end up managing. One of the civilian requests was for us to collect 3 old Imperial small shields, and in order to get them, we need to capture the enemies with them. And the best way to do that is to injure them first, because injuring an enemy dramatically increases the chance that they will be crippled on a subsequent hit. Annoyingly, injury rates are still pretty low even when using the harpoon, and it's just one extra layer of RNG on an already pretty RNG heavy map. I kind of get the sense that this particular civilian request, at least, was not really intended for an LTC run. Anyway, my strategy for the upper half of the map is to body block with my cavalry units. So Reese, Ruby, Leon, and Ward are all going to be seeing some combat in that area to keep the enemies from rushing through to fight the green units. Further south, my infantry units are going to be running as much interference as possible in order to protect the stupid green cavalier from facing any of the reinforcements that started spawning on turn 2. So now let's quickly talk about the crippled status and why it's such a big deal, because I don't think I've fully explained that. Basically, when a unit is crippled, for every space they move through, there is a chance that they have their movement interrupted. And that means that functionally, a lot of these green units have significantly less movement than is listed on their status screens. This is another layer of RNG on an already pretty frustrating map, so I'm not the biggest fan of it, but at the very least, because all of these green units are coming from a battlefield, they're all injured, and that gives Izerna ample opportunity to grind up using her healing orb. She is unfortunately not able to remove the crippled status from them at this point in time, but she's still able to get a decent amount of experience. I mentioned in the last video that she's not high enough level to use the holy orb that I had Reese give her at that point, but I'm using this map to grind her up so that she'll be able to do so in later maps. Now let's turn our attention to a side objective that I'm actually going for. There is an item bag over in the western end of the map, and you may have noticed that I am sending Dean over there. He is the best candidate for this job because of his high bulk and multiple powerful offensive skills, but it does mean that I'm not stopping to give him kills as he heads over there. That's mostly alright though, because he is somewhat ahead of where he needed to be by this point anyway, and he's still going to get plenty of kills as he fights the enemies all the way over there. And that means that the leftovers are available for units like Faye and Sylvis to kill instead. Now in this combat, Leon successfully inflicts an injury on one of the enemies with an old Imperial small shield, which was incredibly lucky really. This happens at the end of turn 4, which means that I immediately have an opportunity to save and preserve my good luck, and because of that I am also able to rig the cripple chance at the start of next turn. This ends up being one of the 2 old Imperial small shields that I managed to pick up. The other one is on the enemy that Reese attacked at the end of last turn. That guy actually has a droppable one, which is much nicer to get than having to deal with cripple into capture. So we've just seen the intended use I had for Daoud's battle cry earlier. He was meant to get the kill on this enemy, which is the one who drops the old Imperial small shield, but unfortunately he ended up missing. Overall though, it turns out okay, and I decided to keep this clear in particular because the RNG for the rest of the turn was extremely favourable to me. Leon managed to inflict cripple on the other enemy with the old Imperial small shield, so I can capture him on an upcoming turn, and then Ruby managed to get a fairly good level up of dodging and then hitting the enemy she was fighting. And because of that, I definitely did not want to reset over this attempt. And that's true to such an extent that even though a bunch of things go wrong later on in this block of the chapter, I decided that it overall wasn't worth coming back to my turn 5 save. Zine has now reached the Sparkly area and picked up the Book of Poetry. This is the only civilian request that I managed to fulfill completely in this map, and you can probably imagine that if I had tried to use Axel for this side objective, he would still be floundering his way through the wilds at this point. So Zine has quite an advantage, and she's going to be able to fulfill another duty in a short while. In the southwestern area, reinforcements have been flooding in, and my infantry units have their work cut out dealing with all of them. But it is important that they do so, because you can imagine that if I wasn't holding them off here, they would be moving steadily east towards the escape points and would be able to cut off our green units as they try to escape, and I definitely don't want that. In fact, because Dean is so busy heading to the item spot, I've actually moved Ward down a bit to cover for if any of these reinforcements manage to make it past the experience gaining game here. Oh, and this map actually taught me something new. I thought that the lost grip on equipment text was a symptom of being injured, but in several instances in this map, the enemies lose their grip on equipment without being injured, so clearly there's only a one-way connection there. Anyway, Dean has reached the item spot, and he picks up the Argentum from it. Now there's an enemy next to him, which is an Axe Guard, and that guy is kind of scary. He's very powerful, and he's very bulky because he is carrying a shield that has a lot of defense. And this is pretty much why I sent Dean over to get the Argentum, because Dean is very capable of fighting this axe guard without dying due to his high bulk and using powerful axes. So it's good to have him here to head the guy off. Now, the enemy who I chipped with Reese, the guy with the old Imperial small shield, has gone into retreat AI on this turn, which is irritating, because that forces me to move Ruby and Reese after him, and that means that they're a little bit out of position from their choke points. Fortunately, I have Daoud there to back them up, and he's going to be coming in pretty clutch. And additionally, because Ruby is now no longer in the choke point, she can be attacked by a much larger number of enemies. On the one hand, that means she's going to get beaten up quite a lot, but on the other hand, that means she's going to get beaten up quite a lot, and that means that she's going to get lots of opportunities to raise her shield rank. And of course, if the enemies miss, also opportunities to raise her weapons ranks. Reese, on the other hand, is surprisingly fragile at this point due to his low HP. He does have his Perseid shield as a backup, just in case. However, I have had test runs in which he got sufficiently badly damaged through here that I had to pull him out of the choke points later on, which isn't ideal. You can see here that Ruby is getting whacked around quite a lot, and that means that she's getting lots of small shield rank, but it is going to cause problems later on, because obviously the small amount of healing at the start of each turn from her food is not going to keep up with the large amount of damage that she is taking here. Now, in a moment, Dean is going to be facing the Axe Guard in combat, and he ends up doing really well. The Axe Guard fails to activate his shield on either of Dean's attacks, because Dean manages to activate Adept, and that leaves the Axe Guard at very low HP for next turn, when he will attack Dean again and will straight up die. So props to Dean for being an absolute combat master. This also means that Dean is going to be picking up his required kills, even though I skipped over them earlier on as he was moving towards the Argentum. Reese manages to pull off a shield block here, so this run did end up being pretty good for him too. Now, you may have noticed that I have been not using Sylvis's composite bow very much. I've been trying to use her weaker weapons where I can without compromising my goals, and that includes using the weaker arrows. Of course, that bit me on the butt earlier because Kramer was not able to finish this guy off before, but that does give Sylvis a kill here. Additionally, I probably could have used Desperation on Dean on this combat, because that would have given him better accuracy, but I obviously decided against that, possibly because I was worried about a high percent miss, meaning that Dean would take too much damage, so there's that consideration. Now, the enemy that Leon is fighting does have an old Imperial small shield. I did not realize this at the time, so I should have been using the harpoon to attack him in an attempt to pick up an injury on him. In my previous attempts, this guy got stuck behind one of his friends who did not have an old Imperial small shield, so I just assumed that the same thing was happening on this run. And I was very sad when I noticed on the next turn that I had cheated myself out of completion of that particular civilian request. But that's just how it rolls in such an RNG dependent objective. So despite the fact that Ruby and Reese had been forced to move out of position, I have still managed to clog up enough of this area that none of the enemy archers are able to break off and head for the green units, which is fantastic. And here we see the effects of Ruby's healing from her food bonus. It's not very much HP every turn, but it is there, and it does help somewhat. Okay, let's talk about Daoud for a moment. He is going to make use of Pulverize to take out one of the enemy archers in a single hit, and that's going to free Ruby up. Daoud seems very focused on powerful offense, based on having Pulverize and Battle Cry. However, his movement is somewhat lacking, which limits his utility overall, I feel. Now, the Crippled Horse green unit actually gets his full movement with no assistance on this turn, and manages to escape. So that's one more reason why I liked this block of the chapter, despite the fact that I lost out on one of the side objectives that I did kind of want to do. Now, you'll probably notice that I am trying my best to prioritize killing the archers near Ruby and Reese, because obviously neither Ruby nor Reese counters them on their turns. So getting rid of them while leaving the ones I can counter alive means that overall the amount of damage I'm doing to the enemy force is at its maximum. So now, there's not a lot happening, so let me share with you something that I've noticed. So, there's this strategic game in which there's a chapter system involving one main mission and several side missions, and it takes place over a single month per chapter, and you can have some units eat food in order to give them stat bonuses, and also raise your relationship with them. And furthermore, recruiting them temporarily is pretty easy, but you have to jump through some serious hoops in order to get them to permanently join you. Furthermore, there is a class advancement system that relies on both your level and your weapon ranks. So tell me, what game am I talking about? Because that sounds to me an awful lot like Fire Emblem Three Houses. It's almost as though the developers of Three Houses all played this game and took notes on it before starting the full development process for that game. Obviously it's not completely identical, but the number of similarities in the structure of the game really struck me as being possibly non-coincidental. Plus, it gives me a prime opportunity to say Kage did it first about half of Three Houses' mechanics. That aside, the green units are now starting to become a bit of a problem, because they have a long way to go, and it's tricky for them to move. So the crippled status in this game causes a unit to have a random chance on every space they move into to have their movement interrupted and be forced to stop. However, there is an exploit that I'm going to be using to get them to move further, and that relies on the fact that they cannot stop in a tile that is occupied by another unit. That means that because these green units will always stick to the road, and so we can predict where their movement path is going to be, if I place my units on said movement path, they will not be able to stop on some of those tiles, and that will force them to get longer movement than they otherwise would. Now I want to turn your attention back to where my infantry units are. 3 pickpocket bosses just appeared down there, and Dean is fighting the first one, Alibaba, who drops a treasure, which obviously we want because it's worth a lot of money. Of the other 2, one of them is actually a bounty target. His name is Pissarro, but unfortunately I'm not going to end up being able to kill him. There are a lot of weird quirks with the AI in this game, and from what it looks like, some of these bosses will refuse to move to attack you once one or more of the other bosses that appear with them have been killed. So that means that Pissarro ends up running away instead of trying to murder my guys, and that means that I would have to chase him down, which I'm not really certain would be a good idea given how scary he is. Pedro, the third one, on the other hand, decides to come over and try and kill Silvus, so obviously we're going to have to surround and kill him. Obviously losing Pissarro is something of a pain, but in the end he is only worth money, and at this point I am kind of swimming in that, so I'm not too worried about that at the moment. Now, Ruby, having overextended a bit on the last turn, looks like she is in a fair amount of trouble on this turn. She is completely surrounded and unable to move away. However, we have enough units up here that she is going to end up being completely fine. And as we'll see later, she also has a vulnerary which she can use in a pinch. Dode once again demonstrates how powerful Pulverize is by wiping out another enemy with it in a single blow. And since that's the kind of power we're working with, it should be clear that Ruby is going to manage. We are in fact clearing out quite a significant quantity of the enemies up here, so I now really mostly need to focus on getting the green units as far as possible. And to that end, Leon is actually going to be backing away from up here because he's no longer needed to hold the choke points. So he is going to be heading down to help ward the infantry units guard against the reinforcement spam from the southwestern corner. So there's another lull here, so I'm going to talk about how great this music is. This is the first theme that I've really fallen in love with while playing this game, and I think it's because it gives me a big Pokemon Mystery Dungeon Explorers vibe, and for the record, that is an extremely good thing. Admittedly, I have caught myself humming some of the city themes idly, but this is the first one that I've really wanted to listen to. It actually makes this map a lot more bearable to play, given how long it is. Anyway, I could have had Dean and Sylvis go for Pissarro here, and they probably would have been able to finish him off pretty quickly, but I decided not to go for it because their hit rates wouldn't be great because all of the pickpockets have pretty high avoid, but also I want to make sure that Pedro dies quickly. Pissarro and Pedro are both carrying pretty nasty weapons, a killer dagger and a sword breaker. I don't remember which one is which, but both of those are bad news for Faye and Kramer, who would be left to fend for themselves against Pedro if I'd run Sylvis over, so we just let Pissarro go. Unfortunately, the Cutlass ends up breaking here, but this is pretty much exactly why I traded the Repair Stone over to Faye, and she is going to be using that to repair the Cutlass in a future turn. If you've been paying attention, you have probably noticed that Dean's Desperation option has been coming up when he's been attacking bow enemies here. And that's because he is now carrying around a Francisca, which has one range. Desperation requires that the target be able to counterattack for activation, so Dean needs a one-range weapon in order to activate it against bow users. I'm hoping that this is going to be important at some point in a later map, though it doesn't come up in this one. Dode, due to his low movement, now needs to start moving towards the escape point, while my mounted units with their higher movement are able to stay and hold the choke point without him. Despite the fact that he is moving away, he is still going to be useful because he provides another body to stick in front of the crippled green units in order to force their movement rate up a bit. Zine, Ward, and Izerna are also helping to provide this service. Ruby is going to back off back into her choke point, and she's also using her vulnerary here. Normally I don't like to waste vulneraries, but in this case this is going to allow her to continue to get hit during this map, and that's going to give her opportunities to gain small shield rank. And I know I keep bringing this up, but it is an important part of my strategic considerations at this point, so it does bear mentioning over and over. Izerna is continuing to heal the green units as they move past her, and this is in an attempt to get her to level 3 by the end of the map. Now, the annoying thing about this is that there is a degree of randomness in the amount of experience that a unit gains from using a healing orb. and that means that it is entirely possible for Izerna to reach the end of her healing orb without reaching level 3, which has happened on test runs of this map, and it was very irritating. However, she's been rolling decently high on her experience overall, and so in this run she is going to end up reaching level 3 at the end of the map. Ruby is going to get beaten up quite a lot over this next little bit, but obviously she can take it thanks to the vulnerary. The units down in the southwest area are having their work cut out for them because there are quite a lot of outlaws down there. And once again, the problem is that nobody down there is capable of counterattacking said outlaws, so it's hard to get them killed. That is why Leon has headed down there to help them out a bit. He still won't be able to deathmatch them, but he is an extra attack that will help us wear them down. Sylvis is going to activate Maim for the second time on this map. I always hold my breath when this happens, but I'm usually disappointed. It turns out that the cripple rate on Maim is not really high enough to be worth noticing. It's definitely not worth the 3 activations per map limitation in my opinion. Kramer ends up breaking his longsword here. It had a red durability indicator before the combat, and once it gets to that point, that means that the weapon only has 1 durability point left, and is 100% guaranteed to break after the next attack. Fortunately, I bought Kramer a fresh longsword previously, so it's not a big deal. Dean would be able to one-hit KO these enemy outlaws because they have low HP, and he's now using a battle axe, which is very, very strong. Unfortunately, his accuracy against them isn't the best, and as mentioned before, he can't use desperation with the battle axe against them to boost it. So that's going to actually happen next turn. It's very nice that he can get the one-hit KO though. Now, a weird thing happens here, because one of the enemy outlaws moves right next to Leon, but chooses not to attack him. I'm not totally certain why this is, but my working theory is that some of these guys are programmed to aim only for the green units, even if they have an opportunity to attack a blue unit along the way. I think that's really weird, because surely they should be able to attack my units if they stop within range of me anyway, but it's just one of those weird AI quirks. Now, speaking of that, the boss, Loris, in the upper left corner starts moving on this turn, and he, as far as I can tell, has that same AI. He will refuse to attack player units who are within his range, in favor of exclusively pursuing the green units as they try to flee. Dean manages to connect his hit this time around, one-hit KOing the outlaw, so I guess that had a decent chance to happen over 2 turns, because I think he was working with 57 hit there, and I guess it's not like he had anything better to do, so that's all good. Now, on this turn, all but one of the green units has finally managed to escape, so all of my efforts now are going towards making sure that the one remaining crippled unit has maximum movement on every turn, and I have Zine, Daoud, and Izerna available in order to make that happen. Leon is wandering around, and I'm still having him use the harpoon to attack some guys. This seems to be for no real reason, but I was trying to fish for another injury, because all of the extra equipment I can get is appreciated. So obviously if that injury had gone off, I would have had Reese be able to hopefully cripple the guy and then capture him for his stuff on the subsequent turn. Obviously that didn't end up happening, because the injury rate from a harpoon is still pretty low, but as far as I'm concerned, it was still worth trying for. In the southwest corner, basically all of the enemies there have now been killed, and there aren't any reinforcements spawning at the moment. This is going to change soon enough, but it does end up being a lull for my experience targets, which is not ideal. However, it is what it is, and I do need them to hang around here, because there is going to be another important set of reinforcements coming in a later turn that I don't want to miss. At this point, the enemies are far enough behind the green unit that they are pretty much never going to catch up to him, as long as I keep up forcing his full movement every turn, but I still make sure ward is in place to intercept anyone who might manage, just in case. Reese actually ends up picking up a kill here, which is very rare for him. I think it's the only kill he's gotten on this map. The trouble with Reese, I find, is that he cannot be deployed on any of the side quests, so his opportunities to gain experience are pretty limited, and that leads into a cycle of him being bad, and thus, again, not getting kills even when he is deployed. Now, Ruby is going to attack, and she is actually going to successfully pull off a cripple due to knocking the guy to 1 HP. Sadly, he does not have an old Imperial small shield, but that does mean that he is free experience for Ruby on the next turn, and we get to take the stuff that he does have. Faye is going to use the repair stone now in order to fully repair her cutlass. So different numbers of uses are consumed when using a repair stone based on the value of the weapon, and fully repairing the cutlass consumes half of the repair stone's 10 uses, which given the power of the cutlass I think is well worth it. The green units are now pretty much a non-concern, but you'll notice that I am not in a position to escape on this turn. This is because, as I mentioned before, we still need to wait around a little bit longer to get another unit who we need to talk to in order to recruit later on. However, the map is starting to wind down now. Since the green units are no longer a concern, most of my units who don't have important roles to fill are ignoring the enemy and rushing towards the escape points at this stage. And I am going to start having them withdraw from the map as they reach the escape points. So, at the start of turn 13, Laurentia is going to finally appear on the map. She is a wyvern rider, and flyers actually have several special features about them in this game, which I will cover later on. For now, Laurentia needs to get over to Reese, but she spawns on the far side of the map. Ordinarily, you would want to move the person who needs to talk to a recruitable unit over towards them as quickly as possible, but there is absolutely no point in doing that here. There's lots of terrain between Reese and Laurentia that would heavily impede his mobility, and so Laurentia is far better equipped to cross that than Reese is. So Reese is going to wait around near the escape point for Laurentia to fly over to him. Iserna uses up her last heal here, and as you will see, it does get her just to level 3. She is now able to use the Holy Orb that she is carrying around, but she's not going to get an opportunity to do so on this map because she's just too far away from the remaining enemies. The infantry squad in the southwest are taking up a formation ready for what's coming, but you will notice that in this formation, all 4 of them are within reach of the escape point closest to them. So you can see that they're pretty much prepared to be finished with their job and moving out as well. Speaking of the infantry squad, this has been a fairly lucrative map for them in terms of experience. In particular, Faye has done very well for herself. She's nearly caught up in level to everyone else, despite not being deployed in Chapter 3. Sylvis has benefited the least from this map. she hasn't even managed to gain an extra level. In fact, I think she's only picked up 1 or 2 kills in the whole map, since she's been too busy weakening enemies for other units to kill. Dean picked up a total of 5 kills in this chapter, and given that I've been targeting him to get 5 kills per chapter, that means that he has pulled off this chapter's quota in just the main mission. So anything that he gets in subsequent side quests is just gravy. And Kramer, of course, is steadily rolling along. So even though Silvus may not have gotten as much out of this map as everyone else has, I think overall we've done pretty well on the experience front in this map. Once all the green units depart the map, when the boss's turn comes up again, he decides to turn around and run away, and he will completely flee from the map in this manner. Now, near the infantry squad, 3 more mid-bosses have appeared. All 3 of these guys are wielding specific magical axes, and these are the object of the final civilian request for this map. Basically, in order to completely fulfill the civilian request, we need to kill all 3 of these axe bosses and take the axes that they drop. However, because of various factors, I'm not going to be able to get all 3 of them. I simply don't have the turns available to get them all. However, I am going to manage to kill 2 of them, so that is something. Over on the eastern edge of the map, my superfluous units have started to withdraw. Especially Izerna, who no longer has any purpose at all on this map. You might think that Leon is worth keeping around for a bit longer, but he too is going to be retreating on this turn, because there simply isn't enough combat left on this map for him to be valuable. Everything that I need to do is under control, at least everything that I can pull off in the time I have available. So, back to the axe bosses. Each of them is fairly bulky, so it takes a couple of units generally to kill each one, but we can pull that off. In particular, Dean is actually able to 2-hit KO any of them using the battle axe, and I'm going to have him use desperation against one of them. The unfortunate part is that he ends up missing on his first attack. Actually, now that I think about it, if I'd had him desperation the furthest axe boss, and he had successfully 1-round KO'd that guy, I probably would have been able to kill all 3 of them using Kramer and Silvus. But unfortunately I didn't think of that, and the RNG would have been against me anyway. So this is what we get with Dean chipping down the middle boss for Kramer to finish off. The reason why it's so tricky for me to get the 3rd axe is that these guys have the same kind of AI that I theorize the pickpocket bosses have. So as soon as you kill one of the 3 axe holders, the other 2 will run away rather than moving to attack my units. And that means that the 3rd axe guy, instead of coming over into range where I could kill him without leaving escape distance for the subsequent turn, he is going to run away. And because of that, going after him would mean I would have to lose turns on this map, which is obviously unacceptable. Fortunately, this civilian request is actually quite lenient. You can still get a chunk of the reward for it for only partial completion. So I am still going to be able to pick up 2/3 of the reward for this request, which is much better than the other one for which I get no reward at all. So Laurentia is about to talk to Reese and convert into a guest. She's not a permanent recruit at this point, but she does have a fairly interesting, somewhat unique pseudo-mercenary status for the next few chapters until we eventually get to permanently recruit her once Reese promotes. Now, Ruby chipped down an axe enemy on his turn, and Ruby is now going to mount up and finish him off to get that one final kill. She is going to miss on her first attack, so that's extra opportunity for spear weapon rank. Well done, Ruby, for being absolute dogshit. In any case, Ruby is able to canto down after attacking to within range of the escape point. I don't believe it is possible to get Laurentia to talk to Reese any sooner than this without being out of range of the escape point on the subsequent turn, so hopefully my turn count is at least somewhat impressive here. On the final turn, I deliberately leave Ruby for later on in the turn to escape because that gives her one final chance to get hit by an enemy archer. Unfortunately, the enemy archer does not pull off hitting her, so she doesn't get any more free rolls for shield weapon experience, but that's just the nature of this RNG heavy game. The rest of my units then start to leave. We are pretty much done here, and finally Reese is going to escape to complete this chapter in 16 turns. That's all for today, and I will see you next time.